Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Donnelly.
And I'm Dr. Hinson.
And we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research, coming to you with our recap, our academic and snarky recap of Season 2, Episode 3 of The Crown, entitled Lisbon.
Lisbon. We're leaning a lot more towards snark than academics these days, but with good reason.
Yes. So, this episode is still a lot about Philip and a lot about Mike Parker, but it does include more Elizabeth than the last episode. So we'll give them credit for that. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for listening to our continued whinging for, I don't know, coverage of Elizabeth on a show that's about the Crown.
That's a show about Elizabeth. We got a couple really interesting parallel plot lines. The Parker's marriage is falling apart at the same time as Eden's prime ministership is falling apart.
Yeah, he comes back from his halls in Jamaica and is like, hey, everybody, what's up? And walks into the cabinet room and they're like, no.
There is the door.
No, you're done here.
Yeah, you can turn right back around.
And his anger is, I'm sure, justified at being abandoned, but this happens in politics. And like the dude that becomes the prime minister, I don't know his name, the one that was the chancellor and now becomes prime minister in this episode, looks at him and goes, there is no justice in politics, Antony.
Yeah, and Antony like appeals to the queen in her like private home, and one of my favorite lines of the whole series is when she looks at him and says, "History is rarely made by those who do nothing."
By those who do nothing,
which is what he's done his whole.
Except when he acted in Egypt because of his horrible relationship with Nasser.
Yeah,
and that's where I think she's chiding him for not doing nothing and like understanding that the impulse of men in power is to act. And that he acted illegally, and she calls him out for lying to.
But he did nothing for the British people. Like he didn't. He was as atrocious as he was foreign. He was just as bad domestically.
Yeah. So I think it's really. I loved the scenes.
Yeah, it's a both and.
With him in this, where he tries to. He comes in and says that it's because of his illness and the doctors. So first of all, he's lying to the queen, and she knows it. Like, she reads the newspaper.
She's not an idiot.
She knows that you're deeply unpopular. And he treats her still with that level of disrespect. And she's just like, oh, well, you know what? You lied to the parliament when you said you didn't know that Israel was involved. And also, you could have done nothing. You could have done nothing with Egypt, and you chose to act like all these other powerful men do. And now you're facing the consequences. Sorry, not sorry. It was awesome. She was just like, I'm not taking your crap.
No.
And she does it again at the end when the new prime minister comes to meet her, and he calls it Eden's war. Eden's war. And she's like, but it's not just Eden's war, is it?
It's your whole party.
It's your whole party. It's your whole government. You all have to take responsibility for your actions. You were as much for the war as Eden was. And so I am always here for Elizabeth not taking crap from the men in power around her. So that was a fantastic part of this episode. More drama over the Parkers is really effectively the end of their relationship with the crown. The queen learns of this eventually. The great and benevolent Tommy Lascelles and her private secretary Michael decide that she needs to find out about the letter and the suing for divorce. And that leads her to visit Mrs. Parker in what became one of the more compelling parts of this episode.
For me, it was the most, to be honest, because what was interesting to me is that Elizabeth struggles in nearly every area of her life to do with humans. So she had the audacity to ask Mrs. Parker to delay the suing.
Which is exactly what Tommy Lascelles did when he, like, accosted her in the park.
Yeah.
But it's one thing for a member of the royal staff to do it. It's another for the queen to go in under the guise of friendship. Like, it was a little dodgy for Lizzie, because she was like, oh, remember when we used to shop together? And I think she struggles with being human and protecting the monarchy at the same time, and you really saw that in this scene.
Yeah, and that's what was fascinating to me, is that I like to think that she knows what she's asking is ridiculous. Claire plays it very ambiguously. So you could do it where the queen thinks she totally has the right to ask this question, and you can assume also that the queen is just pissed that Tommy Lascelles is making her ask this question. So you can play it either way. I'm not sure which way. And Claire even...
Yeah, and I don't think Tommy Lascelles made her. I think
No.
she decided to go on her own and think, like, maybe it was right after she told the new prime minister, you have to take responsibility for things.
So that's the connection.
I think she thinks, like, I have to take some responsibility for this and try and solve this problem myself. But
I just assume Tommy Lascelles makes her do everything.
So I think sometimes. But in this instance, I think she was trying to, like, solve it on her own, and it didn't go well.
This is another footnote in which if we could get some sort of inner monologue from Elizabeth, that would be great. Love to know why she was going. I love that Elaine Parker was having none of it.
No.
Really appreciated that she was having none of it. And essentially, if you notice, people who are not here for the royal family usually call them you people when they're mad at them, which is a very interesting class divide that we can get into at another time. But, Elizabeth asks a favor of Elaine based on a relationship she doesn't have. So it's not a favor, it's an order.
Yeah.
And Elaine's like, nope. My whole life, my whole adult life has been doing favors for you people. I'm done.
And she says, you have no idea the damage that working for you people does to families. Like, you have no idea the damage you do to families. And I really don't think Elizabeth had any clue.
No, because I don't think that it occurred to her that anyone had a family outside of hers.
Well, and that they had a family.
On this level.
But that sacrificing for that duty would damage a family. Because it's such, and like, in fairness, that's the first time she's interacted with a woman on the side of that. Because all the other people in service to her whole life have been men.
And also, in fairness to Elizabeth, Mike Parker's a disgusting human being, whether he worked for the crown or not.
Oh yeah, like that was never gonna be. And Elaine is really.
She's angry and she's hurt and
she's allowed to be. And I think she, But yeah, I don't think Mike Parker would have cheated on his
She's blaming
wife
the
no
crown.
What.
She's blaming the crown for she made a really poor decision to marry a really bad dude.
Yeah, and so her anger is justified, but like I think in terms of that's the first time the Queen's ever heard from a woman.
That's true. It's
because
very true.
Tommy Lascelles is the only other man. Tommy Lascelles, Martin, and Michael, like the three private secretaries that she engages with, are the only other people who have quote unquote families. Group Captain Townsend was never gonna say it was damaging to my family.
Yeah.
Like, even though that it ended his marriage roughly.
But again,
Peter
he's
Townsend.
the one that chose.
Yeah.
To get it on with Margaret.
Yeah. But I think they were separated before that, and so. But it's all this kind of periphery.
It's the hours.
Yeah. She never really had somebody look at her and say, "Working for you ruined my family," which is not necessarily true, but having to deal with the impact of that, I think,
it's something. Yeah,
it's something. So that was fascinating. That was really, really interesting.
I guess it's like one of my favorite scenes of The West Wing in the first season. The chief of staff's wife, their marriage is falling apart, and at one point, the chief of staff's wife says to him, like, "I'm more important than your job," and the chief of staff says back, "Not for these 4 years.
Yeah.
Not while we're in the White House. You're not more important than the job." And I would imagine that that's the kind of oath you take to serve the royal family personally, is that nothing is more important than them.
The problem with Mike Parker is he was serving himself.
and his sexual appetites. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So using the position that he was given by his friend from the Navy.
Yeah, his pal.
Who just happens to be the Duke of Edinburgh. And so it was really, really interesting relationship dynamics. We see this explode kind of on the royal tour. And the prince, he's not the prince yet, the Duke of Edinburgh gets a notification from Buckingham Palace that Mike Parker is to be terminated immediately. So he resigns, and the prince is whinging again. He says, "There's no, in this life, you knew the rules," which in fairness, Mike Parker did. You knew the rules. There's no room for mistakes. There's no room for scandal. There is no room for humanity, which seems a bit hyperbolic.
Yeah, because it's not humanity that makes you cheat on your wife. It's being atrocious human.
Yeah.
Like, it's not humanity that's being a bad human.
And I understand he wants to be able to show compassion for his friend and that he can't. But his friend also made all of these choices and knew what he was doing. And A, cheating on his wife, and B, sending a letter detailing the adultery.
So he could brag
to
the good old boys back home.
So, like, I don't have sympathy for Mike Parker. I don't have sympathy for Philip's need to have sympathy. Like, you knew the rules, and also, Philip, you know the rules, so stop whinging.
What's really interesting about Elizabeth and Philip in this episode is that I can't tell, like, I think Elizabeth, because she loves him, bless, for reasons unbeknownst to myself.
They haven't shown us that part yet.
There's a lot of telling and not showing in this show. It's got to be heartbreaking to her, and she has to figure every single time, like, he's got to change, right? This has got to be the time he changes. This is the tour where he behaves himself. This is when it, and then he proves to her once again that it's not going to happen. And so when we have this grand culmination where he is finally given his Royal Highness status, whatever, she knows nothing has changed.
Yeah, so the rumors persist in this, to the level that now rumors about the Duke's infidelity. And I think one of the more powerful scenes the show has ever produced was the scene between the two of them
absolutely.
On the royal yacht, which they start at the beginning of the season, showing you clips of, and then we get to see the whole thing, where Philip is still acting like a child and she calls him on it, and they obviously decide they can't get divorced. And she says, what do you need to be in this and not out? What do you need? And he said, are you asking my price? And I'm asking what you need. And he says, I need the respect of all of the men with mustaches, apparently like all Tommy Lassells et al., and all the men in the house that don't respect him because he's not really British.
Because he hasn't done anything to earn their respect either.
And that's what she says. You have to earn their respect. And he's like, no, I'll never earn their respect. You have to give me a title, blah, 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 blah.
No.
So she decides to bestow upon him the title, His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, which I learned, incidentally, why we can't call Kate and Meghan princesses, because you have to be a member of the royal bloodline to be the princess. And Diana wasn't technically the Princess Diana, but she was a princess, and everybody just called her princess. But technically, she wasn't the Princess Diana, like Her Royal Highness, the princess. And that's the only time you get to be called a princess. So the Duchesses of Cambridge and Sussex will never be princesses because they are not. But Charlotte is a princess because she is descendant of the royal line. I learned this recently because somebody asked me why they weren't called princess, why she wasn't a princess, Kate. Why she's married to a prince. Why isn't she a princess? She can only be a princess if she's descendant of the royal line. So we don't even know if Harry's children will be princes and princesses. Like, the Queen will have to bestow that title to them because Harry is not in line to the throne. Interesting. Tangent. Apologies for the tangent, but I thought it was fascinating. So he becomes His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip.
So she broke protocol.
She broke protocol for her husband. So she can break protocol if she wanted to for these others. But I'd
like her to break protocol for Meghan.
the princess.
The princess.
So we'll see what happens when William becomes king eventually. What kind of title is bestowed upon Kate? And who gives it to her, because presumably the Queen will be dead by then when he becomes king.
Yeah, and Camilla will never be princess because they were divorced.
Right, so she's never going
She will always be the Duchess of Cornwall.
She will never, even when he ascends to become king whatever, she will never get the title Her Royal Highness, ever, because she was divorced.
I mean, it could be Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Cornwall. He could do that. I mean, maybe. But it'll never be Her Royal Highness, the Princess of...
The Princess
of, I don't know.
Yeah.
Pemberley. I have no idea.
So what I want to point out before we get to the part where we talked about children at the end, which was fascinating, so I want us to talk about that. But for me, the most fascinating thing was in the ceremony when he becomes His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip. And he is clearly, like, the smug look on his face. He's like, this is it. I've arrived. And Elizabeth won't really, like, make eye contact with him. And he keeps trying. He's, like, staring at her. God, I love, like, the face acting between the two of them in this scene was unreal. And then he sits down, and she sits down, and then he sits down, and he looks out at all of these people that he has demanded.
Who may as well have been filing their nails.
Could give a flying flip that he has just become prince.
No cares in the world.
And he realizes, like, the face acting that Matt Smith does, that Philip realizes that he is not going to get their respect by merely being given a title, which, duh. But Brilliant acting.
Great job.
I loved it.
Great job.
But what's fascinating to me was that the episode ends kind of with the end of his relationship to Mike Parker, who is apparently Australian.
Oh, yeah. Who knew?
Who knew that? But he's going home to Australia. And Philip tells Mike that Elizabeth wants more children. And Mike says some really interesting things to Philip about the nature of Elizabeth's relationship with her son Charles, why we have to get this filtered through two men.
Yeah, why don't we get it from Elizabeth?
Why can't we get this from Elizabeth? But it was still fascinating. And Mike says, I could understand how she could struggle to love Charles because he is the living embodiment of her death and her replacement. So how do you love something that only exists to replace you? And Philip is like, she does her best, like she's doing her best, she's not that bad. But Mike says, I don't blame her for wanting children that she can just love as children, which I thought was fascinating insight into how you might think about your heir. But what they've shown us of Elizabeth with Charles is that she is a bit standoffish, but she still loves her children.
Yeah,
I'm not sure why they wanted to give us that and why they felt like Mike Parker had to be the person to deliver that.
I definitely don't understand why Mike Parker was part of this conversation. I don't understand why it couldn't have been Philip and Elizabeth talking about it. I would have even taken that speculation about the living embodiment thing from like two newspaper dudes who don't know her. Like a couple of ordinary British people sipping tea and talking about it, I would have liked a lot better than hearing it from Mike Parker, because that kind of speculation happens with your royal.
But Mike Parker has known her for a very long time and saw her raising the children in Malta. So I think it makes sense that he has some kind of...
That's true. I think I'm talking narratively. It would have been more interesting for it to be a point of gossip fodder.
Yeah.
If it can't be from Elizabeth, then don't give me it.
I don't know why they needed it to happen at the end of this episode.
This episode, it makes no sense. I mean, except, historically, there are, more children.
And we know she gets pregnant and has more kids, soon. So they wanted to set that up. But, after all they've been through in this episode, for him to just be like, I wonder why she hates her son. I was like, what? Why are we talking about this? Fascinating insight. Relevant or not, or accurate or not. We have no idea.
Yeah, there's all sorts of gossip about how Elizabeth and Charles got along before Diana, during Diana, and after Diana.
I'm sure that was lots of drama.
But I don't, nothing's ever been confirmed, clearly. But if you watch how Elizabeth is with her grandchildren... You can also see they're not the living embodiment of her death.
She loves those grandbabies.
She loves those boys and their children.
And those great grandbabies.
Yep. She loves, who doesn't love, I've not met a grandmother who doesn't love being grandmother, so I'm sure.
And great-grandmother.
And great-grandmother.
I bet she's the best granny.
Oh my gosh.
And also hilarious. There's a new documentary coming out about the royal family as we film this. So soon, I think, on HBO. And there's a scene where Harry is greeting the royal staff, and he's like, "Have you run into the Queen yet?" And they're like, "No, no, we haven't." And he's like, "Oh, there's no need to be nervous. It's totally fine." And he's like, "Actually, there is need to be nervous." It was hilarious. He was like, "She's usually poking around here somewhere." I was like, "Oh my god, the royals, they're so cute. Give us more of that."
That's what I want.
I don't want Philip's angst. I understand it, and B, I'm over it.
One of my favorite critics works for Vulture, can't remember her name. Catherine Van... I'm scrolling. This is live.
Live scrolling. We're on the internet.
Catherine Van Arendonk from Vulture refers to this as the one where everyone shaves.
And also has quite an understandable rant about Philip.
Yeah, she agrees with us. So if you are looking for more detail of stuff we haven't covered, Vulture and the AV Club are both good places to head, and NPR's got a couple as well. So.
And I think that's everything we have to cover in this episode. Some big changes happening in the royal family. We'll see what happens next in episode 4. But for now, I am Dr. Hinson.
I'm Dr. Donnelly.
We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.